Hey there, folks. So, non-traditional ICU doc back. We're actually heading down south towards Atlantic City. This is an area of New Jersey that not many people really know. You know, they just think that, New Jersey's the armpit of the United States, which in certain places it is. But that's North Jersey. South Jersey is a completely different animal. I moved down to South Jersey from North Jersey. You see, it's 2023. Moved down here 2007, so about 15, 16 years ago. Never going back again. Ever. I go there to visit once in a while, it's far too soon. So anyway, my last talk, we discussed being a medical student as a non-traditional, and how really, and the theme of that talk was, you have no one to impress, so don't worry. I want to talk to everyone today about what it's like being a resident as a non-traditional. And this is where we as non-traditionals shine. We really do very well because we've been in the business environment before. We were in an office, we were in a lab, we were somehow already living a real life. And as a result, we know how to maneuver the massive amounts of office politics that is going on. And let me tell you something. The amount of office politics in a hospital and in a clinic is out of this world. All right? Not only do you have to maneuver talking with the patient, but you have to talk with their family or their healthcare representative. And then you have to maneuver talking with the ancillary staff, such as nurses, respiratory therapists. You have to be on top of deadlines. You have to be on top of logging things in, especially if you want to go into fellowship, which honestly is just like residency, so there's no need to do a separate talk on how to be a fellow as a non-traditional. So your first year is your intern year, okay? Doesn't matter what you're going into, your first year is your intern year, and that is probably the hardest year that there is, because over the last 4 years, you spent learning medicine. 2 of those years you spent kind of just watching things. You really had no responsibility, and you weren't really doing anything as a medical student. You were presenting, you were doing physical exams, but, really weren't responsible for anything. And your whole goal was to pass the shelf exam. Do really well on the shelf exam, and then do really well in step 2, and then get your residency of your dreams in the location of where you want to go. That's a whole different story, and this reminds me, so I'll talk about the interview season and doing residency interviews as a non-traditional, because that too is another way that we really shine as non-traditionals. So basically what happens is, the first time that you get a question from a nurse about a patient, like Mr. Smithers in room 501 has a blood sugar in the 400s, you're gonna crap your pants. You really are, because now you are responsible. Everything you just learned over the last 4 years is out the window. It's not because you don't know, but rather it's because you're scared. Because you know that now this isn't a question that you have to answer, that this is a person that you have to take care of. But you're going to get a lot of experience depending on where you go for residency. You can potentially be in a residency where there are a lot of fellows and, all you're doing is just scut work. If you find a residency where you have, a good amount of autonomy, but at the same time have what I like to call supervised autonomy, then you're going to get a lot of experience and you're going to get a lot of confidence. And that in the world out there, communication is key. And this is something that the young fellas and young gals who are your co-interns don't realize. They're so focused on doing something, that ordering things and making sure that it is right, that they lack communication skills. In fact, a lot of young people today that are on their phones a lot really lack communication skills. And when they talk to families or they talk to patients, they don't talk with the patients or their families, they talk at them. And they wind up getting, bad reputations, or they wind up, having a bad rapport with the families. And then, they get snippy with everyone else. So they'll get snippy with the nurse, they'll get snippy with the respiratory therapist, with the phlebotomist, what have you. And then they won't be able to talk with the specialist when they have to call them. They get anxious. Us non-trads, on the other hand, especially if you were dealing with customers, wow, your communication skills are through the roof. So, you know that the best thing to do when talking to people is sit down at eye level. Because now you're not talking down at them. Now, don't forget those two little letters, MD or DO, doesn't matter, after your name already gives you a huge amount of authority. And if you're standing up, the patient and their family, especially when they're sitting down, they're staring up at you. So you're looking down at them and they're scared. And to sit down, and now you're at eye level and you're speaking with everyone. And let me tell you something, that reduces a lot of anxiety, because the family and the patient see that you're not in a hurry and that you're there to explain things. You don't talk fast, and most importantly, you don't talk in medicalese. You talk in what someone said was called kitchen table talk. And you're always making sure that they understand what you're talking about. And you keep on making sure that they understand what you're talking about. If you've held executive positions, and the same thing occurs, especially because you're trying to teach the patient and their families about what's happening, just like you used to teach your subordinates. You know, if you think of each patient as its own special project, right? Well, you know that you have to hit certain milestones, you have certain deadlines. In this case, it's not a contract, it's not a product, but rather you have to have your note ready by rounds. You have to make sure that the studies are done in a reasonable amount of time, that you're on the phone with the specialist or with the case manager or social worker to make sure that discharge is ready to go, what else is needed, make appointments, so that they can follow up, because you want to not only get them better, you want to prevent a rehospitalization for the same problem. Because what happens is if the person gets re-hospitalized, yeah, the roads around here suck. If the patient's re-hospitalized within, I believe now it's up to 90 days, well, Medicare is not going to pay for that hospitalization, especially if it's heart failure or lung problems. So, it's in the best interest of everyone to make sure that the patient gets the appropriate follow-up, they have the appropriate appointments. So, you know how to deliver these messages and you know how to talk to people in order for them to have confidence in you and your abilities and your team. So in essence, you're trying to sell yourself. And that's what you have to think about. And then with the office politics, because you've been there, Sally in marketing, that she's going to give you a hard time, because the deadline was yesterday. But, you call her, you talk to her, you know how to smooth things over, and you get your project into marketing. Well, the same thing with nursing, especially outside of the ICU where the nurses are flooded with anywhere from 5 to 9 patients, depending where they are. And you need to make sure that certain things are done at a certain time. Making sure that the person is going to x-ray or CAT scan or gets a certain medication or what have you. And in the ICU, where they're hopefully no more than 2 to 3 to 1, that means 2 or 3 patients per nurse. Sometimes it's only 1 to 1, depending on how sick they are. That there's got to be a coordination between the respiratory therapist, if they're on the ventilator, with the transport, and making sure that the other nurses can watch their patients. So you have to communicate these things and coordinate, because the last thing, especially ICU nurses, like are surprises. So that you have to warn them in advance, because this is what you did when you were working in business. You called John in the other department and says, look, you know what, I need this by next week. I'm going to have this ready for you by tomorrow. Well, the same thing with nursing. If you do a pre-round, that means that you look at the chart before you go see the patient, and you kind of see that, well, looks like they have to leave the unit for a study. You're going to find their nurse, you're going to say, look, I'm afraid to tell you, but you're traveling today. And at least they know in the back of their mind, okay, let me get my stuff done because I'm going to travel to radiology, let's say. And, they can coordinate, whatever medications they're giving. They might tell you, look, the patient's getting blood. Can we coordinate at this time and this time? And that is going to create for you a great work environment. And the reason why is because now the nurse is going to help you. And let me tell you, especially ICU nurses that have had a lot of experience, you will learn a lot from them alone. They have worked with these intensivists who probably have been there for a long period of time. I went back to to the hospital where I did my residency. These nurses helped train me, and they really look out for their patients, and they really do know what they're doing. And hopefully you get a nurse like that on the general medical floor. They're really worth their weight in gold, because they see your patient a lot more than you do. And that means that you're not going to get these ridiculous phone calls like, oh, by the way, their sugar is 110, and then an hour later, oh, by the way, their sugar is 120. Because that's how they're going to get back at you. They're going to wake you up in the middle of the night about 8 or 9 times with ridiculous things that is not necessary, but because you were being a jerk, That's how they're going to get back at you. And with deadlines, you know that, so a lot of these deadlines, they're solid deadlines, that there's no moving them. And, depending on what kind of residency you're in, you'd have to meet certain criteria. You have to do a certain number of procedures. You have to see a certain number of patients in the clinic. You have to log these things in. You have to, do some training videos, what have you. But you're so used to knowing that, you have to hit deadlines and metrics that, it's like second nature to you. And finally, since you only took a 4-year hiatus from the job field while you were in school, you really know how to balance work life. You know that when you're home, and hopefully you're not on home call, that boom, job is left at the job. When I come home, okay, I'll do some reading a little later, but the first thing I'm going to do is decompress, enjoy time with the spouse and the kiddos. We'll all have dinner together, hopefully. Of course, you have to watch the times that you're on overnight, because that will happen, that you're going to have overnights in the hospital. But you understand, that work is work, and you don't abuse it. What I have seen is, a lot of the younger residents, if you have a Jeopardy system is one where if you call out, then they pull a resident or an intern from an elective rotation to cover your shift, and then you have to pay them back. Well, people abuse these things, I have a headache, my left pimple is hurting, so I'm going to call out and call Jeopardy. You do it too many times, and you're going to raise a lot of red flags on professionalism. And, these things follow you for the rest of your career, because you're going to ask your program director, were any disciplinary actions taking place on you during your residency? And if you've abused the Jeopardy system, that's what's going to come up, and you may not be able to get a job. So, we understand office politics, we understand work-life balance. The patients, because you're older, don't tend to see you as a young person and feel that you probably understand what maybe they're going through, that they have to go to work and they have bills to pay, because you've been there and you've done that. And you know how to talk to colleagues, because you've had to do that as well. So I'm going to end that here. As you can see, being a non-traditional is very advantageous. And I'll see you next time.